Hello and welcome to this session in which we will discuss the types of cyber attacks. Cyber attacks can be classified into 6 main categories or 6 main types, and each one exploit different vulnerabilities in order to access the system. One is network-based attacks, and in this session we will focus on the network-based attacks, and these attacks target the infrastructure of the network, digital network, to intercept or alter data. Now, there are 5 other types of attacks, which are host-based attacks, which is what? It goes to the host, computer server. It needs a host. It needs a place, and we'll talk about this in a separate recording. Social engineering attacks, where we try to steal information from users, revealing sensitive information. Application-based attack focuses on software application. Physical attack, this is basically physical, involve direct interaction with hardware to steal, damage, or compromise. And we have the supply chain attacks. Now, the good news about these type of attacks for the information system and control exam, what you need to know is the definition and basic knowledge. Therefore, you would need to practice as many multiple choice as possible. Get familiar with the topics and practice as many multiple choice. And this is where Farhat lectures can help you in this process. I have over 1,000 MCQs that deals with information systems and control. Let's go ahead and get started, where we will discuss network-based attacks. Before we proceed any further, I have a public announcement about my company, FarhatLectures.com. Farhat Accounting Lectures is a supplemental educational tool that's going to help you with your CPA exam preparation as well as your accounting courses. My CPA material is aligned with your CPA review course such as Becker, Roger, Wiley, Gleam, Miles. My accounting courses are aligned with your accounting courses, broken down by chapter and topics. My resources consist of lectures, multiple choice questions, true-false questions, as well as exercises. Go ahead, start your free trial today. The first type of network-based attacks are called trapdoors and backdoors. Well, what are trapdoors or backdoors? Those are secretive method, secretive doors, secretive entry embedded within the network or system. And what they do, because they're secretive, they bypass, they go over, they don't go through standard security checks. What does that mean? It means you can enter and exit without anyone knowing, allowing undocumented. It means no one knows that you're getting in or getting out. What's the difference between the backdoors and the trapdoors? The backdoors are hidden access point left intentionally. So someone left them intentionally, usually by the developer, or inadvertently through software flaws. The software, when it was written, it left a backdoor open, not intentionally, unintentionally. They can be exploited by attackers to bypass security, steal data, or control systems. Now, if the developer kept them, now the developer is aware of them. If they were left unintentionally, they will have to be discovered. Or sometime, if the developer did indeed created those backdoors, they may not do it themselves. They may tell someone else about them. Trapdoors are similar, but often installed by system owners for quick access. Here, you are installing them on purpose to bypass normal authentication process. For example, the programmers or the people that work with the system, or the owners of the company for that matter, they want to access the information without going through the system. So they create a trapdoor. The trapdoor meant for efficient management, for quick access. They can become security risk if someone is aware of them. So if software company include a backdoor in their network management tool for maintenance purposes, this could be an example. That's good, that's normal. But if discovered, this backdoor would allow cyber criminals to infiltrate and control users' network. And this is why it's very important to be aware of the backdoors and the trapdoors. And you want to make sure you know the difference between them. Another type of attacks or a method is covert channels. Well, those covert, what's covert? Secretive, covert operation. Covert channels are secretive communication that transfer data in ways that intended, that's why they're secretive, by the system original design, breaching security policies without necessarily violating access permission. So what we're doing is we are bypassing information. It's not supposed to happen that way. We're not violating access permission. It's happening covertly. So these communication channel enable the discrete passages of information, often in small fragmented forms, to evade detection. So basically going below the radar. Covert channels are primarily categorized under two types: storage channels and timing channel. And each of these channels exploit different system resources or behavior to get those messages. We're going to discuss the storage channel and the timing channel very briefly. What are the secret storage channel? Think of storage channel like a hidden secret note in a book that you know your friend would read later. So you would write something, a message, a code, whatever you want to do in that notebook, and you'll keep it for your friend. You would store it there and they will read it later. In computer terms, this involves altering something in the system storage, like a file or a database, or even the memory of the system, that does not interfere with the system normal operation. So you altered it, but it doesn't really bring the system down or change anything, but can be read by another process or entity looking for that specific change. And you will tell the other party is look for it there. The key is that the information stored somewhere where the receiving party knows where to look. So you kind of wrote something, a message, you store it, and you tell them where that information is located. If the two applications cannot communicate directly, one might change the permission on the shared file or modify unused space in a file system. So the other application to communicate checks for these specific changes to get the message, even though no direct communication occurred. So you left kind of a secret code for the other party to be able to get into. The reason it's called the storage, you placed it somewhere and you told them about it. You stored it there. Timing channels are more about when things happen, timing, rather than where data is stored, because it's called timing for a reason. The best way to kind of think about timing, imagine communicating with your friend by agreeing that if you tap your pencil on the desk at a certain time, it means yes, and if you don't, it means no. So if you want to tell them yes, you agree with something, you tap your pencil. If not, you just don't say anything, and they know you mean to say no without anyone knowing. So in the digital world, in the computer world, this translates to manipulating the timing of certain action or event in a system to pass information. So now what you're doing, you want to pass information through how this information is processed through a timing action. So one process might modulate the time it performs certain action based on the data it wants to send. For example, the receiving process often observe the timing of these action, like how fast or how slow they are, to decode a message. So they would look at the speed of the message. For example, if process A wants to send a message 1, it might decide to use a lot of CPU for a specific period. Now the other party that's looking at this, they would say, okay, they want to tell me it's 1, whereas to send 0, it does nothing. So process B measures the CPU usage over time to receive the message, knowing when the message is 1, knowing when the message is 0. It's called timing, based on the speed of that process. Buffer overflow. Buffer overflow attacks occur when a program receives more data, it means it gets overwhelmed, than its allocated buffer can handle. What does that mean? Leading to unexpected behavior or system vulnerabilities. Most likely, sometime if you're watching YouTube or you're watching Netflix or you're watching some streaming shows, this buffer like circling comes. Why? Because there's more data allocated to that system that it can handle. Buffers are temporary data storage areas used by software to hold data while it's being transferred from one location to the other. So the buffer, basically this extra data is being held there. When these buffers are filled, because kind of, okay, you kept that extra capacity, beyond their capacity, the access data can overflow into adjacent memory spaces, potentially overwriting valid data or control information. Think of it as it's like a cup or a storage. Once that storage is filled, this is the extra buffer. But once that extra buffer is filled, the information might go into the adjacent memory. We have a memory here, and by going into that adjacent memory, it might override valid data or information. And what does that mean? This vulnerability is exploited by attackers to do what? To disrupt program's execution or to inject malicious code, because now kind of you have access to the memory or you have access to the program. So by carefully crafting the input data, an attacker can manipulate, can inject the program to execute some sort of a code, granting them unauthorized access or control over the system. So how did they do this? Because that extra buffer was filled, the information overflow, then that's what they do. They put a code in there, and that code will manipulate the system. An example would be web application that asks for a username and store it in a buffer designed to hold a maximum of 50 characters. So you just choose a username. So what would an attacker do here? An attacker would submit a username longer than 50 characters, overflowing the buffer. So if the overflow overwrites a return address or a pointer in the program memory, the attacker can redirect the application to execute malicious code. To simply put, once the system is overflowed, guess what? If you can send that code, will do what? You might be able to open a backdoor to compromise sensitive data. So this scenario highlights the importance of proper input validation. And we talked about input validation. Simply put, once you put more than 50 characters, simply put, the system would refuse it. Just that's it. It doesn't go through. But if it's allowed, if there is no input validation, it will try to process, and it goes into that buffering. Or they would have a buffer management software which doesn't allow you to do that. Technique like bounce checking, using safe function, and implementing canaries like special code that detect buffer overflow are critical in preventing such attacks. In some places, after you input something, they want you to check it, check something before you proceed. This is part of it, so you don't overflow the system. Another attack called denial of service, DOS, denial of service attacks aims to disrupt a normal operation of a targeted system, making it inaccessible. So basically, denial, you're just denying the service. For example, a website goes down. Why? Because many people or one person, they try to access the system and they will overwhelm the resources on the website. The website can no longer handle resources. It denies access to other users. Attackers execute these attacks by overwhelming the target with a flood of traffic or requests, surpassing its capacity to handle them. For example, a website can handle 200 users. Well, you would flood it with 1,000 users, it goes down. Then you will deny the service to legitimate customers. This volume of data consumes all the available bandwidth and system resources, causing legitimate requests to be denied, slowed down, or rejected altogether. So the DOS attacks exploit vulnerabilities in network protocol, or simply the finite nature of the system. You have a limited amount of resources. You would render the service unavailable, and guess what? Users cannot use it. Attackers can achieve various malicious objectives, from causing operational disruption to masking often more invasive attacks. Maybe while this is happening, you can go in the system, in the back end, and do other stuff. There's the denial, and there's DDoS, which is DDoS, distributed denial of service. This is when you're using one computer, you're using multiple computers from multiple locations to have this attack, which is a more serious attack, but basically the same thing. It's called DDoS. Man-in-the-middle attacks, or MITM. Man-in-the-middle attacks, as the name suggests, there's one person in the middle of two parties. It occurs when an attacker positions themselves in the communication pathway between two parties. What can you do when you are in between two parties? You can intercept. You can also change the information being exchanged, alter this. This type of attack exploits the real-time processing of transaction. Because transaction is going fast, you go in, you intercept, and it's also when the data occur, or conversation to capture or manipulate the data without the knowledge, of course, of the entities involved. The attacker can intercept, send, or receive the data. Basically, if they can send it, if they receive it, they can send it for someone else, making it appear as if it's a normal exchange of information is underway. Because you can, rather than making it going from this party to this party, if this person intercepted, it can send it to a third party or a fourth party that they wanted it to go to. So this way you can compromise the confidentiality and integrity of the communication, allowing attackers to steal sensitive information. And obviously, if you can intercept, you can eject malicious content or impersonate one of the parties to gain further access to the system. So just man in the middle, and that person is intercepting the communication. A common scenario or a common example involving an attacker using an unsecured or poor secure Wi-Fi network, those found in coffee shops or airport, and often they warn you that this network is unsecured. When a user connects to this compromised network, the attacker can intercept the connection and insert themselves between the user's device and the website the user is visiting. For example, you're visiting your banking. For instance, if the user logs into their banking website, the attacker could capture the login credential. Basically, they're intercepting what you are sending. How would you protect against this? Use encrypted communication network, HTTPS. You could use what's called VPN, virtual private network, and also secure tunnel for data transmission to safeguard yourself against those interception. Also being aware and vigilant. Be simply put, don't access your bank account on an unsecured network. Now let's talk about port scanning attack. Now port in French, a door means porte, port. So that's what it's access, port, a door. Port scanning attacks involve systematically scanning a network's computer for open doors, open port, interfaces through which network communication can occur, which is the port. Now think about you are inside a building, and that building there's hundreds of offices. What you do, you go and you try to open the door of each office, see which one will open up. This is what port you're trying to access, just figuring out which one, you just try it. You go in there, you'll try to open the door. While the term port can refer to the physical connection point on hardware, in the context of this type, it refers to the logical port. So here you're looking for a port on the network used by a network protocol such as the TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol, and UDP, User Datagram Protocol, which are virtual or digital access. These logical ports are integrated to network communication. They are part of it, serving as endpoint for data exchange between devices. So this is where the information communicate on the network. Now you're focusing on the logical port. So the attack specifically target logical port like TCP port 80. What is TCP port 80? It means you have an HTTP traffic. If you look at a website and it's HTTP traffic on that network, it means that's the port number 80. Or port 443 for HTTPS. HTTPS, which is a secure port, has port number 443, like a door number. Think of it as a hotel. You go in, there's room 80, which is TCP port 80. That's the door 80, or port 443 for HTTPS. It's a more secure. So what you do is scanning those ports, basically checking to see if they open up. By scanning ports, attacker can discover what? Services that are running on a network device, identifying potential vulnerabilities and trying to exploit them to gain unauthorized access, trying to see which port is vulnerable to get into. Now, it's normal for companies to conduct business to have open ports. Why? Because to ensure proper functioning of the business. So the application work properly. Customers can access the data that they want. However, issues arise when these ports are misconfigured or associated services are not properly secure. So you're not securing them. So the vulnerability will start from using unsecured communication protocol. They stem from that, or failing to apply security patches to services running on these ports. For example, utilizing default or weak login credentials. So you have this network communication and you still have the original login from the network provider. And usually those are standard. So anyone that work in the network industry, they know what's the password for these. You gotta change them. Or have inadequately configured firewalls that fail to restrict access to sensitive port. The sensitive port, they are open, which is they're not supposed to be open. So certain port might be open for business. It's just because you need customers to access this information, but you have to monitor those, make sure the communication is secured, so on and so forth. An example would be an attacker uses a port scanning tool, basically, to probe the network of a business, and they discover, for example, that port 22, which is secured shell connection, SSH, is open on one of the servers. Well, they would look further. They will find out that the server is using a default password for this port. Well, guess what? They're going to exploit this weakness. The attacker will gain access to the server, potentially allowing them to steal data, deploy malware, or establish a foothold for further attack on the network. So all what they did is they kept looking until they find this door. Port 22, it's not secured because they're using the default password. We have access. Let's talk about ransom attack. Ransom attack involve malicious software that encrypt, lock your data, the files on a victim's system, including operating system and application, effectively locking you out from using your own data. The attacker then does what? Demand money. They want money, usually cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, for the decryption key to unlock the files. You either pay me or that's it. You're never going to see your file. So this type of cyber attack can target individuals and organizations alike, causing significant operational disruption, financial and reputational loss. For example, a hospital's computer system get infected with a ransomware, causing critical patient record and operational system to become inaccessible. Well, the attacker demands a ransom to restore the access. The hospital faces not only the dilemma of paying the ransom, but also the immediate operational challenges of patient care. Without, they need to know the record, the access for these patients in order to serve them. So ransomware are very serious. Basically locking your data, and you gotta pay me in cryptocurrency. Reverse shell attacks. Reverse shell attacks allow an attacker to gain remote control over a victim's system by making the victim machine initiate a communication back to the attacker's machine. Simply put, you are giving them access. And this happens. Sometimes you call IT, they would say, okay, I'm going to send you this link, you click on it, and you're going to give me access to your system. That's fine. How about if someone tricked you and you gave them access? This is what reverse shell attacks. This is achieved through the use of malware or scripting technique that open a shell on the victim's system. Sometimes you don't need that, just a simple phone call and people will click on the link. Since the connection originates from inside the victim's network, well, they're inside now the network, it's often bypass the firewalls because you gave them access. They pass the firewall, they bypass other security systems. Basically, somebody like the criminal knocked on your door, you open the door for them, they're inside your house. They bypass all security connection. So for example, an employee downloads a compromised file that executes a script to open a reverse shell to the attacker. The attacker now have access, has a command line interface on the employee machine, allowing them to bypass the corporate firewall and access the internal network. From there, they can execute commands, steal data, infiltrate the network. So bear in mind, both the ransomware and the reverse shell attacks exploit vulnerabilities in the network security practices and software. To mitigate against these risks, you should employ multi-layer security approach, including regular update for the software, and most importantly, employee awareness and training. Employee awareness and training. Simple awareness and training might help against reverse shell and what else? Ransomware. Just don't click on links you are not familiar with. Don't download any software. And robust backup strategies. If they take your data and you have a backup, at least you can your life goes on. You can keep operating your business and monitor your network to detect any unusual activities. Let's talk about replay attacks or eavesdropping. What does that mean? It means listening when you're not supposed to listen, which is very similar to what man-in-the-middle attacks involve cyber criminal listening on a network communication, capturing a legitimate message, then retransmitting that same message at a later time. This type of attack exploits the authenticity of the captured message to deceive the receiving system into thinking it's receiving a new legitimate request. So the other party that's receiving the message, they would think it's a legitimate. Since the message is genuine and was previously authenticated, the attacker does not need to decrypt or directly tamper with the contact to misuse it. So an example will be where a user logs into a secured system and the authentication request is intercepted by an attacker. The attacker then waits and sends them the same message, authentication request again, if the system does not have a protection, like timestamp, when, like this message is new, it's not the old one that we verified, then guess what? The other party might accept the replayed message, granting the attacker access because they think it's a legitimate message, it's a legitimate request. What's a good example of this? Well, an attacker exploiting the buffer overflow. Remember we talked about the buffer overflow earlier. The buffer overflow vulnerabilities to take control of the slack that then carefully select and chains gadgets found in the system own library. So they're using their own programming. These gadgets are assembled to form a payload that perform actions such as disabling security defenses or opening a backdoor, all without introducing a new code that could be detected. Why? Because you're using the code that the system is familiar with. It's not going to be detected by anti-malware system because kind of you're using your own code against yourself, but they're chaining those pieces together into something different. Let's talk about spoofing. Spoofing attacks involve the malicious falsification of data to cover as a legitimate part of the network. So there's something that's not legitimate, but it's being falsified to appear if it's legitimate. Tricking the network into granting unauthorized access or revealing sensitive information. Think about a group of kids where players wear color bands to show they belong. That's how you know they belong. If someone puts on a fake band, they can join the game and as a result cause trouble unnoticed. Think of the analogy. This is what a spoofing attack on a computer looks like. Attackers fake their identity to sneak in, steal information, spread malware, pretend to be a legitimate part of the system. Because once you're in, you are in. And there are many types of spoofing attacks called address resolution spoofing or ARS. This form of spoofing targets the process that connects the IP address to the media access control, known as the address resolution protocol. By manipulating the ARP message, what's going to happen is this. The address resolution message, attacker can associate their device address with an IP address of another device. So simply put, you associated your system to another system, such as a gateway or another computer. So you act as if you are that other party, effectively doing what? Intercepting or redirecting the traffic intended for that IP address, because everybody thinks you are that person. So it's like tricking everyone in a room into thinking you are the mailbox for a specific person. What's going to happen when someone sends a message to that person? Message means a letter, the data. They give it to you instead because they believe you are the mailbox, because you are pretending to be that individual. Now, what can you do? You can read the letter, you can send it somewhere else, and the sender thinks it safely reached for the intended person, but it did not. Another type of spoofing is called DNS spoofing, also known as DNS cache poisoning. This attack involved altering the DNS record in a DNS server so that the domain name points to a different IP address controlled by the attacker. I'll give you an example. For example, farhatlectures.com. This is my IP address. My IP address is listed on a DNS server with a company. Now, if someone can go into that server and change farhatlectures.com to another website, they change the DNS server. So everyone that goes to farhatlectures.com will go to that other website. As a result, users trying to visit a particular website are redirected to a fraudulent or malicious site without their knowledge. So someone might have farhatlectures.com, a similar page that can lead to theft of personal information, credential, or other sensitive information. So what they did, they went into the server and they changed the address of that IP address. Then there's hyperlink spoofing. This technique involves altering the destination URL in a hyperlinks to lead unsuspecting user to a malicious website. Here, this is a little bit different. This can be done through phishing emails, messages, or compromised website where the displayed link text appear legitimate, but the actual hyperlink point toward a malicious site. For example, once you click on that bank account link, it looks like a legitimate bank account. Sometimes this happens often. Amazon sends you, those hackers sends you a web page. It looks like your Amazon account, and they'll ask you to input your information or click into your bank account. So this is hyperlink spoofing. DNS spoofing is when the attacker target a financial institution clients by employing DNS spoofing. They alter the DNS entries for the bank's website on the DNS server. So it's different than changing the hyperlink. They're changing the server. So when the users input the legitimate address, attempt to access their online banking, they are instead redirected to a lookalike phishing site designed by the attacker. Now the site captures the user login when they enter their information, giving the attacker unauthorized access to their bank account. And what happened is they got the information, login, password, they can go to your account And let's take a look at this multiple choice question from farhatlectures.com. Which of the following is not a common vulnerability exploited by port scanning attack? So when you scan port, which one of the following is not a vulnerability? Well, is unpatched software not a vulnerability? Yes, we're looking for not. Unpatched software is always a vulnerability. Poor login credential, a vulnerability. Misconfigured open ports, it means it's not properly misconfigured. That's a vulnerability. Strong encryption is not a vulnerability. Strong encryption means what? This is a security measure. You're encrypting your data. This is not a vulnerability at all. Therefore, which one is not a common vulnerability for port scanning attacks? Strong encryption. The others are unpatched software is a vulnerability. Misconfigured open ports, vulnerability. Poor credentials, vulnerability. What should you do now? To learn and prepare for the CPA exam, the Information System and Control, you want to do what? Work as many multiple choice as possible. Farhat Lectures, I have over 1,000 MCQs. That's going to help you prepare for the exam. Invest in yourself. Good luck. Study hard. And of course, stay safe.